Welcome to Empowered Returns, a show that surfaces forward-thinking real estate advice that investors and developers need to help them invest smarter and build better. Welcome to another episode of Empowered Returns. Today we're here with Joe Hanley of McDermott, Quilty Miller. Welcome, Joe. How are you?
Good to be with you. Doing
Awesome.
well.
Very cool. And PT, as always, how are you?
Hi, Mike.
Things are
Joe,
good?
how are you? Good to have you. Yeah, things are great.
Yeah.
How you doing?
Yeah. First timer. First time, second time listener, first time participant.
I mean, that's unbelievable, right? He just came out and admitted he doesn't listen to the show.
He'll listen to this one.
That's right. So, Joe, why don't you just start diving in with a little bit of background on your kind of career experience here?
Sure. Yeah. Been working with McDermott, Quilty Miller as a partner, zoning attorney, land use development. 25 years. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary as a firm.
Awesome.
And I started with them basically when the firm started. And so we do almost exclusively focus on land use, zoning, permitting in the city of Boston and greater Boston area, Somerville, Cambridge a little bit as well. And we also do a lot of liquor licensing work throughout the state, mostly for private clients. And have worked with your fine firm over the years on residential developments. I entitle a lot of multifamily residential development through the Article 80 process with the BPDA, the City of Boston, and the Zoning Board and Zoning Commission for PDAs and the like.
Cool. I think we'll dive in deep to the entitlement process and what your take on it is. But first of all, are we getting an invite to the 25th anniversary party?
Yeah, well, we got to plan it, right? So we need one of these. We need an event planner like you guys have for this. But
give us a call.
Yeah.
Well, maybe just dive in. Obviously, we want to really go deep here on the entitlement process and how we can, what kind of advice you would give to developers, investors who are really sort of starting the process. Maybe we can divide it into sort of a small project and a large project, fashion and see. But so I guess overall, big picture, what's the landscape of the entitlement process in Boston like right now? What's the appetite for development, so to speak?
Yeah. Boston is such a desirable market, and it's not such a huge market either, right? You guys know this well.
Yeah.
We've been working together for some time, but I would say, up to like 2018, certainly during Marty Walsh's tenure, just the scale of development, right? Every neighborhood, go to these neighborhood group meetings. They used to have maybe one big development at a time. You'd go to South Boston or Brighton or East Boston, and there would be 6 or 7 huge mega projects. We're talking 300-400 units of housing, mixed use, stuff like that. Obviously, we have cycles, as you guys know well. City's still very busy. It was a challenge, to say the least, for the development community to have 3 mayors in less than a year, and that has nothing to do with whether one is good or bad. It's just
Throw a pandemic in there too.
Right, and a pandemic.
Right. Yeah.
So it's sort of like learning to do this stuff. We're in person, thank God, but a lot of it is still virtual. And but the market, is there's just a lot of uncertainty. You guys know that there's high interest rates. We continue as a region to struggle with extremely high construction costs. And yes, we have Harvard, MIT, we have great institutions, and we've seen some population increases, at least in the last decade. But it's getting, I hear from folks that say, we find it a little more challenging, and but there's still a lot of room to grow. I see it, and projects that we're working on are still transformative.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, it's not as if we're running, obviously not making more land, as you guys always probably tell folks, but there's still lots of stuff to clean up.
Yeah.
The projects we're working on are still former gas stations,
Right.
formerly contaminated sites, warehousing, stuff like that. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think, there's always a big interest, but in a I wouldn't say downturn, but in this sort of certainly going sideways right now, I think it brings the serious players, more of the long-term players into the market or keep staying in the market, and then folks that are maybe a little less established might be more challenged.
Yeah. So kind of walk us through, I don't think people realize, right, how entailed and intricate the entitlement process is, right? Both entitlements and then eventually permitting and building. Let's just kind of walk us through, like, I'm a developer, I come in, I've got a parcel of land, I think I want to do 100 units, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of walk quickly as, kind of in a rocket pitch kind of way. Like, what's the process look like for me, both in terms of time and then the various steps, and then maybe highlight a few things that people just don't think about that are actually a big part of the process.
Yeah, I mean, Boston, Massachusetts, New England, unfortunately, we invented the regulations, right? and so it's like there are certain cities and towns that have done what they can do to try to streamline that, but it's almost like when they get involved with that, they create, more of a process. And you can say, hey, you're a lawyer, that's good for you. We don't want to make work for no reason. We try to do is deliver results for developers, right? And you nailed it. Like, is there some sort of predictability? So if you can say, for example, in the city of Boston, a large-ish project, let's say 100,000 square feet, or between 50 and 100,000 square feet, 80 units of housing, you should be able, with good team, with good representation, to get through the regulatory entitlement phase, which is sort of what I do. Is I'm like a delivery room doctor, right? Where, like, here's your permitted project, and then there's time after that it takes construction drawings and the actual permit to be issued. But for what gets entitled, it should take about a year or so.
Okay.
Right? And if it's a really big project and it has a PDA and it has more regulatory approvals, maybe that's longer, or if it's a master plan development. And so, the good thing is, Article 80, which is a section of the zoning code that restricts or requires review and approval by the BPDA for projects that are over a certain size. I'm not the first one to take a client through it, right? And so we do know that, looking back, here are the ways that we can look at it, and here are the things that we need to address. But I would say the big factor on that kind of drives a little bit of, like, the challenge is, Boston's a city of neighborhoods, right? Just talking to the city of Boston, the zoning code's written that way. So when you say client comes in and goes, oh, I got the site, it's so everything differs depending on where it is, what neighborhood it's in, both from the zoning code, but also from the community process, right? So there may be more active neighbors in one part of South Boston, less active in another part, or they may have certain concerns that maybe they don't want more housing, for example, and that's what you're trying to do. So it's that sort of, like, what we try to do in building a good team is to provide some level of predictability based on looking backwards and what we've seen.
Yeah. And so, just thinking about that, I think that's exactly right. It's a city of neighborhoods, and you sort of see it in, obviously, zoning code that has evolved and been edited, quote unquote, over many, many, many years, and there's not a lot of consistency in a lot of ways about it. But you mentioned trying to build some consistency. Is there some sort of tips you would give to people to be prepared to go through the entitlement process to help bring some consistency or predictability to it at all, or is it just?
Yeah. I said, like, clients, it's like if you run the marathon, right? You're not gonna, what you do 2 or 3 weeks before the marathon doesn't matter anymore, right? So it's all building a good base. And I think in the development process, doing early outreach, right? Doing your homework, going to the community before you even have a filed plan, right? You got to be a little more willing to take risks, right? And, talk to people and stuff. The other thing, that's one way I think to, is a tip. The other is team building, right? You guys know this. We've worked with you on teams. And that's not to say that, clients need to spend a ton of money, but, you bring in an architect, for example, that's from California, which nice state, but, doesn't know, not just the code in Boston, which, we do, but just how the process works, how to interact with agencies. Same thing with consultants, transportation consultants. And as you get through this Article 80 project process, you're required to have certain consultants and a good broker. Bring someone in early on. What I've seen most recently is landscape architects. City wants to see, well, it's not just the building and the neighbors too, right? What do you got to do on the ground plane? Just bring in someone early and start thinking about that.
Yeah.
And for you guys doing home ownership, bring in, a good residential consultant that can kind of help you share the vision with the neighbors if that's what they want.
Yeah, and I think that's a key part in thinking about like what is the kind of the culture of the city and the neighborhood. In a lot of ways, that's just as important as knowing the written code, so to speak, as it has evolved over time. So, and it's funny, a piece of advice that you gave that pretty much every guest on the show has talked about is building a good team and building a team early, and because it's just the right advice rather than just trying to wing it and figure it out as you go. But building that team of professionals is so important across
I think
all
it's
the
good
disciplines.
financial advice too.
Yeah.
Like, you're taking a lot of risks. The problem is, nothing is guaranteed in the regulatory process for zoning and permitting. We do have some as of right stuff, but again, in Boston in particular, a lot of it requires relief, and it has. So there's always going to be variables, right? And you're spending a lot of money and taking a lot of risks. And it blows me away that some folks might take the risk of not investing in that up front. And I always see that they pay for it on the back end. It's like, well, this took me, as I said, like it should take, let's say, a year for this bread and butter type 50,000 square foot development to get entitled or whatever. You can easily make that 2 or 3 years if you got a bad team.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Right.
Well, and because to your point, it's like you got to know what you need to deliver to get through the process.
Right.
And if you don't have the right team assembled and you're not prepared, you're just
Yeah.
going to keep missing things, and it's just going to keep setting you back. And
Yeah.
like I said, it's like every setback's probably like a couple months,
Yeah.
right? You know,
Yeah.
if you hope to get through a certain milestone at a meeting in April,
Right.
and it doesn't happen, like you might not get back in front of that same, regulatory commission till June.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you can just compound that over and over. Right. And it's interesting what you said about the landscape architect, because that's, definitely something that we've seen that's just historically hasn't been as, integral a part of the process, early.
And on that note, actually, besides the landscape architect, but there's a big piece of almost at least all the large projects have a big sort of community benefits package involved.
Right.
Would you consider those part and parcel of the same thing in terms of like just the how you're setting up the landscaping and whether it's the streetscapes or the parks or the public realm in terms of any of these projects and just other public benefits? How important are those types of things to think about, and at what phase?
Yeah, I mean, and that's something too in Boston. I know, like, you have linkage, you have certain ordinance requirements depending on different projects, but just in general, the Article 80 process does include, sort of a mitigation component. I think the city's gotten much better at that. The BPDA has currently. And when I first started doing this, it was, more like, oh, we want you to give 50 grand to the church down the street, even though they're like a nonprofit organization or religious organization or something. And now the city is much better with, like, they want the mitigation to go to improvements on the infrastructure around the project site. It makes a lot of sense, right? And you see a lot of these neighborhoods that, oh, you're building this great housing, this great residential project. It's near the train, but the sidewalks to get there are like narrow and crappy and cracked. Like, yeah, we want the project to improve that. And, that's how it should work.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing that a little more, but because there's been some policy suggestions, in the last year or so with the new administration, that's brought some consternation, right? Where it's like, okay, are we going to be required to do how much more? And, I do think the mayor, she said, look, developers have kind of been out there negotiating one-offs with the city. And so getting some certainty to that is a good thing.
Yeah.
How far do you go?
Yeah.
It's a concern.
That's the thing. I know actually PT and I were at an event where we were talking with the mayor, and she was, talking about trying to build in more certainty. Her sort of, thought of the city growing sort of 15%, really population continuing to expand and grow. And you've got to add, you obviously have to develop, you have to develop housing, you have to develop places to work for all that to happen. But it gets more difficult when you continue to add on, like increase the inclusionary development program, affordable housing, or linkage, as you mentioned, which is the commercial component of that contribution to affordable housing and jobs. And so the question is, in whether it's public realm or those other programs, like at what point does it become too much to make a project untenable, or just so unpredictable that people aren't willing to invest and develop in Boston, at least, anymore? I don't know if you have a
and I think you're starting to see that now, right? That, I'm always like, one of the things I say to like my developer clients is like, let's not, they're genuine people, and developers are community minded. They're there, they want to build because the community is great and everything. But you got to be flexible when you go through the process. You can't be like, oh, we had a particular experience like this. I just want to know what the result's going to be right now. It's like, yeah, okay, well, it's called a process, right? So to be able to give when you can, and not all of it is monetary, right? A lot of this stuff can be done in kind. But to answer your question, there is a point where, for example, let's say rule of thumb, if a monetary commitment is, say, more than $5 a square foot, you're starting to get, because you have all these other things like the IDP, or I'm not talking about linkage, then it's like, hey, you're pushing too far.
Yeah.
And in a real strong up market, it's tough to, push back on that. But I think now it's like, you can show a pro forma to the regulators. Community's not going to be sympathetic to it, nor should they be. But it's like, hey, we can't make this work.
Yeah. Right. It's interesting because, and we were talking before we started recording about the sort of linkage change recently, but and some of the arguments are, well, it's only $5 a square foot, or it's only $6, it's only $1, or it's only 80 cents, but all of these marginal dollars add up for all of these things, and that's where and maybe in a boom town you can keep pushing more on, but when the market starts to taper a little bit as it is, it gets more and more difficult to push these things through and still make. Especially in a rising interest rate environment, all these other things, like debt, cost of debt, all these things. So it gets difficult. And while I think we all understand the need for the city and to raise money, and for developers and others to contribute to a lot of these things, like affordable housing, like jobs, like everything else that we need to do as a city, it's important, I think, that we all recognize and don't try to put too much on to any individual project, certainly to try to solve all the problems all at once.
Yeah, and it's like there maybe was a culture in the city, back a couple decades ago, or continues a little bit, that developers were just looking to make money, and they didn't, but you've really seen some really good, thoughtful. Most of the stuff that gets built and the architects that come in, it's a big improvement. I mean, we've worked on ones like we're building over converting an old industrial site that doesn't do anything for anyone with bad sidewalks. And, that's not to say you should have a huge honking building, but like the process, I think the community process helps make it better. Right. But, as far as asking, too much, and I think it's the combination, right, that now, not everyone's getting in depth with this, but it's kind of like the stock market will freak out when a new president or some president, like they don't get that deep. And so if Boston gets the tag that it's like, it's too expensive to do business here because it's rent control or rent stabilization, then you say, well, that hasn't passed yet. And it's only 10%.
Right.
Like, but then now it's 20% IDP on site. And now it's, and the construction costs are crazy. Yeah. So then you get a label that it's like, maybe, you look at the Taxachusetts label, right? How long has that taken us to
shed?
Right?
Have we shed it? I don't even think so.
And, it's, I think the governor now gets it, right? Yeah. And Charlie Baker got it too. But
I think, and sorry, Pete, to interrupt you, but I think the big thing here is most of these leaders are smart people. They get that we have a supply issue principally, but there's just oftentimes there's a little bit of two-sidism, almost too much. And yes, we need to raise money. Yes, we need to have more affordable housing, but what is the mechanism to get there? Right. And it's, at least in my opinion, I think most I think most people are starting to rally around it, is building more housing.
Right.
And we don't want to go in the opposite direction or discourage that to the point where you said we don't want to build a reputation here of being not friendly for or not able to be investable as a city.
Yeah.
Yeah, and market rate housing is good for affordable housing too, right? It can't just all be affordable, but it's like you get folks out of other, temporary housing, and you want people to be able to climb the ladder as well. I think we need to do more in the middle class housing, and I think developers would want to participate more in that, and it also lessens the subsidy impact on the project.
Right. Yeah.
But I was reading, there was a piece, MIT had a study, and they were saying that to live, I don't know if it's comfortably, but just basically have a acceptable life as a single person in Boston, you make about $80,000 a year. So that's more than you would make too much to qualify for any of those IDP units, which is too bad. And what they're saying is that's just so you can put a little money away, get a down payment, hire Charles Gate to find a condo for you, right?
Well, sell your condo.
Right. Yeah.
Find you a new condo.
Yeah, there you go.
After we rented you a condo.
Yeah.
Hire a lawyer.
Well,
to
we
get a
manage
liquor
all your
license.
properties too.
Right. Well, there you go. And help develop new. But on the production side, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's the mayor. I think there's a lot of things the development community can agree with the mayor on, especially when she says, "Hey, I vision a city of 800,000 residents." Right.
Yeah.
We're at like 670 now, maybe a little under 700. Well, if you're going to do that, you got to build. Right. You need places.
Totally.
Where are they going to live? That's that's like two neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think just to go to the point you were saying earlier, I think we know, because we work with a lot of developers, we work with a lot of folks who are building and being very thoughtful about what they're building in a lot of cases, and being very forward-thinking, delivering great product to the market, whether that's really nice new lab space, office space, residential housing, parks, public realm improvements, all these things. I haven't met a developer yet that is just all about how can I make the most bucks fastest? It's more about I have a vision to improve the city and develop great housing and build a good product. But I think there needs to be a much bigger scale, broader base of sort of education for the neighborhoods about how this process works and what that give and take can be and should be, as well as obviously trying to clarify some of the
I
zoning.
think
But
not dissimilar from the Taxachusetts reference, right? There's this perception that these developers are just money hungry scumbags, right? And not have the best of only their interests in mind. And we've got to find a way to change that perception, because that is working with tons and tons of developers, all of us at this table. That's not the case, right? And I guess along those lines, what are kind of a handful of commonalities you see on the guys who've been or girls who've been most successful sort of navigating through the community process, right? We know of you could say a couple names in some of the core neighborhoods we work in where they always do great when they're getting their projects approved. What are sort of the, again, sort of the consistent attributes that they're taking in their approach to have more success running through the process than most?
So, I mean, there's the more exciting thing like visionaries and all that. But I think, basic stuff like they're genuine and honest, right? And care. Right. So Norm Leventhal, right? Giant. I was walking through this morning through Post Office Park, P.O. Square Park, and now they now have cocktails there at night. They have a little coffee place. But that was his back then, was before I was doing this, but it was we can create something, right? Obviously he did well, but you're creating a place that people want to be, and that type of commitment, I think, is what you see in all of these developers. I love working with developers because they're not you're right. I don't have a lot of clients to say, oh, how much are we going to make or whatever. It's how can we do this? They love building. They love community. They love seeing the good ones vision what is going to happen at the site, not just the building, but I can see people out there learning from an older guy, from vets, and then new people coming in and helping to kind of improve the state of the neighborhood and the surroundings. And I think that's a great trait. The other is having thick skin and the ability to pivot, right? So you know, like I love the Mike Tyson used to say, everyone has a plan till you get punched in the face.
DeMella special
I say
right
that
there.
too often, probably.
Yeah.
So I say that to my
It's a great
clients.
line.
Have you guys been hanging out behind my back or what?
Yeah, but that's development.
Yeah.
So here's what's going to happen. It's like we're going to go through the process. You want to, here's what you think you want to develop right at the end of the day. And things are going to happen in the entitlement process. And it's probably not going to be exactly that. So you need to be flexible, a little bit of thick skin, and you're going to get punched in the face.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
No,
It's Boston. It's development's a blood sport, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think those are the traits and like the names that we all know, and going back to like some of the greats like Norm Leventhal. That's what they all had. They were genuine, they cared, but they were tough. they were able to endure.
So when someone's coming in on a new project, what's your usual first point of interaction with a client? Where are they at in their process in terms of having a vision or not, or just early on, or are they asking you to sort of do a zoning analysis, or where do you usually get involved?
Yeah, so it's just what PT said, and I always encourage anyone that's long. I have a lot of my clients I've had for a long time, but I always say just give me a call when you find a site, and I'm not looking to run the clock. I'm looking to protect your interests, and a lot of times it'll be don't do this.
Right.
They're like, so the best deal you do is the one you don't.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not, for me, it's not worth anyone's time to mislead and say, gee, this could happen. And then you go through this no one wants a process without a result.
Yeah.
Right. And so, it comes in at that point, and then there's the zoning analysis, but there's other pieces, right? And so they call it a practice, right? Having done this, we worked on PT and I worked on a project together in Brighton. You guys are marketing, but early on in the process, and at that point, I think we got a really good scale, size, and density for that project because we were willing to do home ownership, and Brighton still has very low home ownership, like almost 75% rental, right? But at that time, it was very novel. And then we also spent the time to show the neighbors and discuss them that, like, this can actually work. Here's what we brought you guys in, but we literally, we tried to do, I think, successfully, was to put the neighbors into the development in the future and say, imagine, where would you want to live? How would you want to have, all the amenities and things like that? And it worked,
Yeah, I think the other thing I always talk to clients about is really trying to understand the market you're building into too. Like understanding like who are the buyers or residents going to be for this building, and then think about how that's going to fit into the landscape of the neighborhood overall. So it's not just about, again, building the building, but it's about what is the lifestyle you're creating for these people who are going to be living there, as well as the neighbors. And I think that's an important key part to think about very, very early on. And a lot of the good ones obviously just naturally do that. But some of the newer developers that we talk to, or as they're getting started doing some bigger projects, especially, it's like that's a really key component of what they need to think about going into a project, I think.
And being realistic. I mean, there's a lot of times it goes without saying, but sometimes it doesn't. In Boston, you could say, well, this really would make sense for this site to be cleaned up or for this site to be residential. But there may be other political forces, regulatory, community forces, or, like I got working on a site in the city that's extremely contaminated. So like a lot of the sites in Boston get some petroleum, things like that. But this is like, like red hot, federal designation. And so one of the things I learned, I'm not an environmental lawyer, but it was like just the excessive cost before they even put a shovel in the ground. And, to a certain extent, you have to make that a part of the discussion, at least with the regulators. The community's not going to say, okay, you're a developer, but the reality is, if it costs you like $50 million to clean up a site before you even put a shovel in the ground, it kind of drives what you can do there.
Yeah,
right?
100%. Right.
Unless you're the government, And so most of my clients, and like you guys, are private developers, and taking a lot of risk on, and you get equity and financing. But as you know, that those commitments don't come until you put the skin in the game and you get it permitted.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Yeah. That's the thing I think a lot of people don't realize, well, I should say a lot of the public doesn't realize, like, you're not able to raise any real money until you get through the entitlement process, right? So this is all developer risk, and that's why it's a risky game. But you know, some people look at the potential profits at the end of the project and they're like, well, you're making tons of money. And sometimes, but there's a lot of risk that's a perfect example. What you're talking about is like cleaning
and
up
timing too, right?
Yeah.
Like this, I didn't see it, but the rates going from, what was it, a low of like under 3 to now up at 6. It's like in such a short period of time. I mean, you think about it and you're like, well, some of these projects, right? If they took like 3 or 4 months less, would you time it? I mean, you don't want to probably like have that in your business plan, but sometimes just crazy stuff happens, like a global pandemic, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, I mean,
see.
it's Mike's point. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of risk, and I think again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about sort of being able to communicate and educate people to understand the full context of what's entailed in a development, right? So that there is that give and take that you mentioned that enables someone to sort of navigate through the entitlement process in a way that's mutually beneficial for the community and for a feasible project. So
No doubt.
what are a couple of like the most memorable projects that you've been involved with?
So I love doing work in certain neighborhoods. The whole city, but I've had a lot of really good experiences in South Boston.
Yeah.
I think we were talking about the Washington Village project that Core Investments and Samuels is now delivering the first phase. And the great thing about that is, there was, once we got to a point, there was no daylight between us, the community, the elected officials, and the city. So we're all rowing in the same direction, and that's one too where there's some height. There's 8 different buildings. It's 5 acres, but it's taking a site that's not contributing, and I would say stand on the shoulders of giants, and it was basically the community had already said what they want. We want a vibrant mixed-use community. We want this type of housing, and we had the right developer that appreciated it. There's another project that some newer, more like a little more innovative stuff. We have some projects that are not parked. One that I think you guys are working on that's right near a train station. It's a little bit of a different shape, so we were able to do an exclusive vehicle share program that was like the first of its kind. And so your rent gets you a share in a courtesy vehicle, and it's an EV. And, so that was cool.
I'm actually curious. Let's dive into that a little bit more, actually. 'Cause I'm curious, how did that go? You're talking about sort of Zero Athens in South Boston, and it's a very uniquely shaped parcel and a very, very, now I think, very cool use of how they designed it with the architecture-wise. Those guys did a fantastic job. But how did that entitlement process play out? Because there's no parking on site, right? You're talking about the share vehicle process. Now, that was
discussion.
Because that's before the city removed the minimum parking requirements.
And in South Boston,
and in South Boston as well. Yeah,
we are, but I think, the local leaders realized also where it was, and the shape of it. The folks in South Boston are very. The people in the community groups and the elected officials know just as much about development as we do because they've been, there's just been a lot of it, right? And I think there is some fatigue, but in this situation, the truth will set you free, right? Because it's like, okay, it's a triangle-shaped site that's like a putting, a pitching wedge from the train station, right? It's like, okay, and you literally cannot park it, and to any significant degree. So. That was one, where we got good support and it was exciting to work on. I've also done some stuff in, we were talking about all the regulation and stuff, and I did a lot of stuff in Somerville when Mayor Joe Curtatone was there, and that was just really exciting because Somerville had that, as the mayor would say, despise the Somerville. You know,
Yeah.
you won't even if you ask someone that's younger now, what's that mean?
Right.
Somerville's great.
Yeah.
But they
There's
were
all
like
sleepovers there. Like, what is it?
yeah, right. And so they were like willing to like, you know, invite developers in and you know, make a long story kind of to go full circle here. But, you know, in Boston, when we look at all these new fees and all this stuff, especially in this time, it would be nice if there was a little more carrot with the stick, right? And so that's what Joe Curtatone did. It's like, okay, yeah, we're going to increase it to 20% affordable. But by the way, we're going to give you FAR of 10 and a height of 300 in assembly, which is a project that I did. So
Yeah.
That's exactly.
You can make that work.
Yeah.
right? It's not always going to work that way, but I mean, to, you know, give and take, a little more give if you want production.
So exactly right. And so the question though, and I think Boston has come around with some of those, like we just talked about, removing the minimum parking requirement, at least because that has historically been a tactic to block projects, right? And there's other ideas too, but especially since we have a great transit system, why not encourage use of that transit system instead of parking cars everywhere? I'm not going to get on my soapbox about parking that people have heard me talk about.
He'll get on his
cars.
soapbox, trust me. At least once an episode, there's a little soapboxing.
You still live in the South End, right?
You can't have hair like that without a soapbox.
That's right. We should be building for people, not for cars.
Yeah. What is that? Yeah, I think that's pretty good. I think Director Jemison has said that. You know, we have a housing crisis, not a car crisis.
Not a car crisis. Exactly.
Well, that's a big change, right? It's from the path from a few years ago. I mean, they're almost encouraging you to go with less parking.
Yeah.
I mean, they are encouraging you to go with less parking on certain projects, like even a home ownership one that we're working on now. It's just in the consulting phase, but like they're really grinding the developer to decrease the parking, you know, which is interesting because, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, it was the total opposite, right? It's like, well, you got to have
it's like, sounds like you're maybe a little more progressive on it than I am. I'm not old school either, but I do think, you know, like the parking thing, it's like things change, right? So it's like, 20 years from now, are we going to be even driving gasoline vehicles? Probably not. But like, you know, it's such a visceral thing for people in the community. They just think of like, it's built today, right? You know, and so it's interesting. I did a study on, when I talked about the one in Southie there in Athens Street. You know, there was the development in front at 14 West Broadway that had a lot of parking, and so they were saying, you know, we had to do 2 spaces per, and it's like, and I looked at it, I go, well, Uber didn't even exist.
Right.
It was permanent.
Right.
So things do. And you see this with your clients where they're like, gee, I wish we built a bigger Amazon room.
Right.
For
EV stations now, it's like even stuff that was, you know, conceptually designed 3 years ago. It's like, oh man, we, you know, wish we had a lot more EV capability in what parking we do have than we, you know, plan
So I
for.
think the Zero Athens is actually it's being delivered like pretty soon. I think it's timely, right?
Yeah.
Like, but when we were having the discussion, as you said, it was like it was a challenge. Like,
No, I mean, look, it actually just opened and it's been extremely well received by the residents. You know,
but it's logic, isn't it? Like, and I think the community and the officials got that. It's like, all right. Someone said to me in the meeting, how many cars do you have? And I said, actually, I have 2, and I have 2 kids, and you know, I wish I had 1 car. I would love to, you know, but for now, that's where I am. But I also don't live in a 400 square foot studio that's, you know, 10 feet from the train station.
Right.
So like, the truth is, the folks that are going to live there, we do need family housing, but we need a mix. The folks that are going to live there are going to be mostly single, younger. Maybe even have some empty nesters that don't want a car.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly right, though. I mean, I think that's the key thing is understanding where projects exist, who, like I went to at the beginning, who's the likely resident in this, and you know, 10 feet from the train station, close to downtown, you know, we're not talking about a project in Roslindale or something where it might be, it should be probably more family oriented, and maybe you need more parking or things like that. That's where we've got to be able to have that.
But on the progressive side, right, that we see, and you may see it like, sort of like, we're trying to permit a condominium building that has 3-bedroom units in Roslindale, and they're, we think you should non-park it. It's like, and the train's nowhere near it. It's like, okay, we're not saying you have 2 spaces, but we think 1-to-1 for home is appropriate, and we want it to be successful, right? So I do think, you know, neighbors, when they say, you know, no parking, I mean, to a certain extent, you know, they do have a good point, but in time, right?
No, I agree. I mean, you can't go from like 2023 to 2043 in an instant. I mean, there's got to be a progression
Takes
to
20
that.
years.
It takes 20 years.
Wait a minute.
Right.
I'm not good
Carry
at
the
math.
two. No.
I'm a lawyer.
I'm not going to let you. You'll bill us for trying to do the math on that.
Good at that math,
Yeah. Shocker.
Still use a calculator though.
Just throw a dollar sign there.
But it's exciting. I mean,
Yeah.
you guys have seen it. It's exciting. I mean, PT and I lived in this neighborhood when we were young bucks, so to speek, and
young bucks.
Yeah,
Is that what we're going with now?
Yeah,
All right, we'll give it to you.
That's kind of a nice way to say it, or maybe not.
Now just a lot of gray hair on this.
90-year-old guy, like, young bucks.
Now it's
We
just
were like,
a lot of gray hair on this podcast.
but I didn't have a car then, and
right.
because I couldn't afford it, but I bought a condo, right? I was like, this is great. Of course, I didn't have a parking space, and my office is downtown, and but it's gotten so much better. I mean, there wasn't as many options for younger working folks that did fairly well, but like in other neighborhoods to get housing, like Brighton didn't have as much new stuff. A lot of it was students, which is fine, but like I didn't want to live next to a bunch of kids, students or whatever. And then South Boston hadn't really. Now there's just so many good options, like the stuff that's going on at Boston Landing.
Oh.
I'd love to live there if I was a young, you got the Bruins training facility, all the great restaurants, you got a train station.
Yeah, unbelievable. I mean, and 100%. I think that's such a key part, and actually it's a big part of your business too. So maybe it's a good segue to talk about like sort of the mixed use retail part of the businesses that have a lot of these restaurants and bars either opening up or trying to open up, and maybe you can talk about some of the challenges on that.
That's great too, though, isn't it? I mean, like I remember. So I graduated college in '92, and early '90s there wasn't much going on in Boston, and the food scene was like,
non-existent.
It was a couple like higher end places, and the rest was kind of like. And then I do think we were sort of getting saturated right before the pandemic, because we had. But the one thing that the BPDA did, and I don't necessarily fault them for it, but a lot of these projects they wanted ground floor activation,
right?
And so a lot of them were permitted and are being built today, right? And they're all coming online, and they, now the restaurant business is back, especially in the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Downtown's still struggling quite a bit, but we're not set up for it as a city. There's no liquor licenses. Even if you have a ton of money, you can't find one.
And just there's just, I'm not super familiar with that side of things. So what's the cause? Just not enough liquor licenses in existence?
So Boston has its own quota, separate, from the state. It's like based on population and all that. And Mayor Menino and Mayor Walsh had increased it, and it's just we just had a lot of new places open up, and then admittedly, there are guys that hold licenses that spend a lot of money for it, right? But now it's in no one's interest if you have a bunch of vacant storefronts, especially when the market gets tight, right? And it's like, oh, actually, that wasn't just a giveaway. We were actually counting on the rent,
right?
And these spaces.
Well, and the people who are buying in or leasing in these like new workplace neighborhoods, like they wanted that killer restaurant downstairs in the building, and they want to be able to walk within their neighborhood to have a handful of options to go get a great meal.
Look at what Steve Samuels did in the Fenway.
Oh my God, that is like that. Upper Boylston Street is like, I mean, because again, we lived on the other side of it, but I mean, just wind, and we're not talking very long ago. Within 20 years, the 180 that stretch from the fence
and he brought in like local too. It's not like. Some of these, the great thing about Boston is the fact that we fight hard for our neighborhoods, and people want, because it's like, you go to like Houston or other cities, like everything's a chain.
It's a strip mall chain culture,
That is the beautiful thing I think about Boston that I especially love, is just really trying to encourage the local businesses, locally owned, especially on the restaurant side and other things. You see these national chains or just like, it's just not as cool,
And they're kick-ass. And then the developers recognize and have partnerships with these restaurants. And like you said, I mean, you would want to live at a certain place or a building because there's something like that.
Right.
And so I think it's just the government has to catch up. The best thing it can do is try to just remove hurdles, right? And be partners as part of the process and let growth happen, right?
Yeah.
What on the liquor kind of license side, or for a developer that's got a either a desire or perhaps an obligation to build or activate the ground level, whether it's restaurant or whatever, what do you think the best way is to try to encourage a solid restaurateur to solve the liquor license problem as best as possible going in?
Yeah, I mean they should look at making them sort of development specific, so they're like a blanket license, right? And that way they can't be transferred. Let's say they don't have value, right? But you can, someone goes in, doesn't work out, the license stays there. They can get someone else coming in. Those kind of like just thinking a little bit differently, right? And some of that's already has been done. I mean, just think the pandemic, we were all like, it's like, was anyone going to a restaurant? And then what was a restaurant? And then all of a sudden we're like,
how do I eat with this mask on? It's really hard.
Right. Yeah. And now we're like, but now we seem to be back. Right. And I think that's great. But it's like, again, most of these places, that there aren't many places that are like poorly run, right? People want to open, we got these great chefs. They want to open places that are like contributing, right? Yeah. They're employing good people. They pay good wages, right? And, so that would be a good way to look at it, is to create some of these that are.
I like that idea. Yeah.
And and it's important to like, you can't just say we're going to put licenses in a certain area and therefore people will come. It has to relate to development, right? And we do need more good quality restaurants and say like Mattapan. But the best way to do that isn't to say, well, there's a free license. You just figure out where you want to put it, is to come in and say, we have a transformative mixed-use development project, and the city is going to have these licenses set for that, right? Which is a great way to do it. Yeah. It's all about growth, right? It's hard to have a restaurant that's in the middle of nowhere with no one else around.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless it's like,
well, and then
some other reason to be there.
Yeah, and the other side of that too is I think I can imagine there's probably restaurateurs who have paid a substantial sum for a liquor license that don't want to see the value go to zero.
Yeah,
things like that too. Yeah. But so I can. It's a difficult problem to solve, I suppose. But I think the idea that is great. Have really sort of development or parcel specific licenses. Yeah.
And like beer and wine licenses. Those used to be, when I first started doing this, they were not at get one because like pizza parlors back then, or like there wasn't places you went into where they had wine or anything, right? It was just a restaurant with a full liquor license, but now you got all these great little small places that, and why wouldn't you want, if someone opens a 50-seat bistro, great homemade pasta, like why should they even have to buy a beer and wine license?
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it probably makes a difference of whether they survive or not, right? They're not going to get rich off it, but it's like you and I personally, like if I'm going to go into a place, nice small place like that, I want to have a glass of wine with dinner. Otherwise I'd be like, I'm probably okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Just do takeout and have my wine at home.
Yeah. Really dating yourself now,
Right.
College in '92, pizza parlor.
Yeah, it's good. I've been around too long.
Bowling,
Huh?
Yeah.
Bar pizza.
Discotheque. That's actually a European word, but it's in the zoning code. That's the other thing. We're looking at the zoning code too much at these uses, and it's like discotheque. Like, is there a discotheque in Boston?
Yeah.
Did I miss this?
Yeah. I'm in. Where is it?
Yeah, let's go.
That's awesome. What any other advice? As we're kind of winding towards the end of the episode, any other advice you'd give to developers coming into the process, whether a small or large project?
Find a good broker. They're
there you go. Almost as hard as finding a lawyer.
Yeah. No. I think thinking big picture, and I mean, again, there's still a lot of great things about Boston. It's easy to be like, oh, the sky's falling and stuff. And try to to see the potential to collaborate, right? I think the mayor is like a lot of stuff she said, we agree with. Everyone wants to see the process streamlined, right? And, there's just tremendous opportunity. We got to do something with, with our construction costs, how we deal with that, or at least factor that into, the process going forward. And, don't be afraid to take a risk, but just build the right team. And the good thing is, we're not curing cancer here, right? Like we have taken projects through and, through the approval process, we can look back and see what works, right? And so, the more you do it, the better you get.
Cool. Let's one last question to end on a positive note. What are you most excited about sort of the next 10 years of Boston or the region?
The further growth of the neighborhoods, right? And to see what the live work combo can be. Yeah. Right. So we built a lot of housing, especially in like South Boston and stuff. But we get back to these, where you live and you work like you do. Work here, and so that's something that wasn't as prevalent, in Boston originally it was, but you're starting to see those neighborhoods take off, right? So I'm excited about, whether it be lab or some of these mixed uses, which candidly, a lot of my work has been on, residential of scale developments with some mixed use on the ground floor. But now we're seeing more of the jobs, which is just great. Yeah. These jobs that the kids are going to be able to get, and the labs that they're developing in neighborhoods that were never there before. And you look at Boston Landing, I mean, right. It's awesome. Just incredible. Yeah. And so, what I like community building and partnering with neighborhoods. And I think is you can do a lot with the schools. Yeah. And when some people say, well, kids aren't going to get jobs in the labs, why not? Yeah. Why not? They did the Gillette was like a huge job driver in South Boston. There were folks that came from modest means and went all the way up the ladder, right? And I think that's something we can do in Boston. That's pretty exciting.
Totally, and it speaks almost directly to the that 15-minute neighborhood concept where you have everything you need to do within a 15-minute walk, right. Essentially. Like so, there's just speaking back to the car thing, but you can get your job there. A car. Yeah, you don't need a car, but you have your market, you have your job, where you're going to dinner or eat. Right. You've got your schools, and all these things are really forming this neighborhood community that's so much more powerful. Yeah, and it does sort of harken back to the past in Boston, and pretty much everywhere a long time ago, but really I think there's so much opportunity to do more of that, not just in the city of Boston, but in some of these other sort of towns and areas around it as well to get, Yeah,
it's a lot more connection now, right? That like you guys do work out in the suburbs too, or it's greater Boston. I would say they're not all suburbs, but it just you to look at what's going on in Somerville and Assembly Row. Yeah. Have you been over there? Like the restaurants and and again, it's that they got partners there. They have Puma, North America. So like they're not just jobs that people are like driving in from the suburbs, going to work and leaving. They're like living there, they're investing, right? And that's what makes, you've seen it. The South End's great. Oh, yeah. All the great restaurants. And when I lived in this neighborhood, I probably spent most of our time in the South End at restaurants,
Smart guy.
Yeah.
A lot of discotheques.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I'm going to open one of those.
There you go. Perfect.
That's my advice. Call me. Let's open a discotheque next to a pizza parlor. Bunch of young bucks in there,
We will name it. I am in the Old Buck Discotheque.
There you go. Yeah, we'll have fun.
Yeah, awesome. Good. You guys have fun without me. Yeah. But all right. Well, Joe, it was a great conversation, man. I appreciate your time today, and looking forward to more conversations, and we'll work together in the future.
A lot of fun.
Thanks for being here, Joe. It was
awesome. We'll see you in the next episode of Empowered Returns.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Empowered Returns. If you're a forward-thinking real estate investor or developer looking for actionable advice that will help you generate market-beating returns, make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast fix. I'm Mike DeMello with Charles Gate, and I'd love to connect on LinkedIn and further the conversation for any specific questions you may have. Thank you for listening.